So starting from a blank page, you have absolutely nothing, just clear white paper or a black screen. There's nothing there, and you have to write as much stuff down as you can, as fast as you can. And this is for one reason, and that's editing. Editing something that's already there is infinitely more easy than trying to nail something down that's good on the first try. You can think of it as part of the 80-20 rule. The point is that it's way easier just to make something on a whim and see if you like it or don't like it than it is to just try to come up with something really good on the first try. So a good place to start to think for ideas is physical settings. And this can really be anything. Oftentimes it'll be some kind of celestial object, but it doesn't have to be. It can be something that's important to the story or something that's not important to the story. In this case, it'll be a traditional planet, or well, it's actually a moon, but it really can be anything else from a ring world to some unspecified random region in space. This specific project that we're doing right now, I'm going to choose a moon, but let's do something cool with it. Let's put people on the moon. So now we have a moon civilization, but that's kind of scary because a civilization has a lot of things. Well, it has a society, culture, buildings. I guess that would be infrastructure, religion, politics. And I can't write all of those things properly. I can't write them down to a point where it seems realistic, right? Because that'll be a lot of work. Tolkien spent, his entire life making just a language and everything else? Wait, so how did he write that many books? Well, it turns out that you're not supposed to create a one-to-one scale of a fictional universe. I mean, that's just absurd. That's way too much work, and nobody could do that with any amount of time. So what you have to do is create an illusion of a world. And the best way to do that is to pick things that you like about that world and concentrate on those things. So you don't need to work on every little facet of everything. You just need to work on the big things and then a little bit of everything else, and it'll seem realistic enough because no one really is going to care about the ancient political structures of some town in some place that none of the characters are ever going to go to. Well, characters if you're writing a story, but okay, I digress. Let's get to that later. That's for later on in the video. Right now, all you need to know is that you don't need to make everything. It doesn't need to be that detail-oriented. Just work on the details of the things that you like. And so that's what I'm going to do for this world. However, if you do want to spend 40 years making a language or political structure, that's totally up to you. I mean, there's a lot of really cool world-building projects that happened because of that, and some of them became stories. I mean, I mentioned Tolkien before, and that's literally exactly what happened. Okay, but there's a problem. What if you have more than one world? I mean, there's sci-fi stories, and those have multiple worlds. They sometimes have multiple galaxies, and sometimes they have multiple universes. So how do you world build? Are you supposed to world build for each individual planet? No, that's not how this works. What world building means, and I mentioned this in a previous video, is more similar to something like universe building or network building. So what it is that all of these things, all of these different facets of your story or of your world universe are connected to each other in many ways. Let's say a character does something, and that affects the setting that the character lives in. And in turn, that setting affects the character back. This is a very simple example of the connection or the network that is made between different aspects of a story or of a universe/world. I'm going to keep on saying world building because that's what I wrote down in the script, but it really could be universe building or cosmic building or whatever. It's just one self-contained thing. And the reason why I put so much emphasis on this and why I keep on mentioning it over and over again is because this really bypasses a lot of complications. Because let's say you have something like The Expanse, and light spoilers, I guess, for the story. There's different aspects of this world/universe. There's, things like the protomolecule, the FTL travel system, the spaceships, the ancient portals, the portal creators, I forgot what they're called. And these are all just part of the world building. You also have, the complex political structures of different planets, all of the characters and their relationships to their homes and their politics and everything. These are all things that influence each other and all are world building. They all contribute back into each other and create a system that has a beginning and an end. And every story that takes place in that universe or world is a small snippet of that huge world's history. And so the world building, it kind of fades in and fades out of the story. Now, if you're having a hard time figuring out what I'm saying, or if what I'm saying doesn't make any sense, then please go watch video 1. This is actually video 2 of a series, and hopefully after watching that, everything makes a little bit more sense. Okay, so where do we start, with writing stuff down? Well, you could start with that, writing stuff down. So a good place to start is text. And text is fun because if you're using pencil and paper, then you literally have no friction. You could just do whatever you want. You don't even need to write down words. You could just draw. But I'm going to be using text digitally in this video. And it's because of one thing. And that's Obsidian. But if you just rolled your eyes and are about to click off, it's okay. I'm not going to talk that much about Obsidian. But everything that I'm writing for this video is going to happen in Obsidian. And so is the wiki and the history, and everything that I'm doing basically is going to happen in that software because I absolutely adore it. But you can do this with anything. You can do this with pencil and paper. I don't think Tolkien had Obsidian. If he did, that would be pretty cool. I think he basically just had it in his head. Okay, so usually you start with a name, but I already have that, so we can continue. Okay, so let's gather some info. This is a particularly long topic because it takes a really long time to do it, and you can keep on doing it forever. I mean, research is something that kind of just never ends when you're world building, and even if it does, you're really never finished. That's why I think it could take you 40 years to do this, but let's try to cut that down a little bit. This is because research is the crux of world building, at least in the beginning stages. And it's because there's a lot of places to start, so you can research a lot of things to get started. And you really need to figure out what the purpose of world building is at this point in time. Because if you don't, then you're kind of just going to keep on going in circles for a long time. So if it's just for the sake of world building itself, you can start off anywhere because you don't really have a goal in mind, so anywhere is good. But if you do have something, then it's good to start off with a higher level of that. So something like the geographical conditions of an area, or something along those lines. Like if you have a character, then you can start with the setting, and then you can go above that to the country that they're in, and then above that to the continent that they're in, and then to the world and its weather patterns, and then kind of work backwards like that. But if you have no goal, then you can start off with something like continents and work down from there. It's up to you, and it doesn't really matter. This is just a starting point. If you have something in mind, like a synopsis or a gimmick or some kind of phenomena, then there's a lot of places that you can start from there too. In fact, that's how I started this project, but we'll get to that later. So let's get an example of that. So Brandon Sanderson on his podcast, Intentionally Blank, does this thing called Bad Story Ideas, where he talks about bad story ideas. But one of these was really cool, and it came back later on because people loved it so much, and it was a world in which the characters live on a free-falling burrito, and it falls through several layers of dip, and that's what their weather or seasons are like. And all of this was based off of an idea of a city in perpetual free fall.
Endless tunnel, endless hole, with a city falling through it.
Okay. The city is on a disc?
Yeah, some
that
sort
is
of
staying
some
level
sort of
somehow.
thing.
If you don't like that kind of approach, you can go for something a little bit more scientific. But, I'm not going to list off every single scientific phenomena and then keep on listing them off. If your world has civilizations or you plan on putting civilizations in it, the next thing to do is to figure out how they started. So, for example, one of my favorite ways that a civilization is created is if there's a portal or if the civilization that exists right now started from a crash landing of a previous fallen civilization. So this is a trope. It's called precursors. A really big example of it from one of my favorite stories is this lore of the modern day humans from Halo. They're actually from a portal, from a very advanced human civilization that existed way before the events of the current story. Anyways, once you have the beginning, you can start fanning them out. So people spread. That's how people go. They expand. And whatever intelligent species that you're writing out, they fan out just like how humans did. And, well, make a civilization. If you want an idea of how to do this with creatures that are distinctly not human and not humanoid, then a really good book is Children of Time, which also coincidentally has one of the best depictions of a rampant AI I've ever read. So it's good to research also our own world's history because there are a lot of events that happened in them and they all played out in very different ways. We obviously don't have all the objective facts for things that are from archaic history, but the generalizations and the guesses that historians make are really beneficial. So there is a level of extrapolation and guesswork that has to be done when doing research like this, but there's a lot of important concepts that you can put into your own story and world, like something like a golden age or a downfall of a civilization. These are all patterns in history that repeat themselves over and over again, and you can use those in your own work. If you're writing a world for a story, then this all is in the quote-unquote lore camp, but it's just a backdrop. Lore and world building are very similar, and I don't know if the distinctions that people make are that beneficial, but I digress. In this case, the closer that you get to the story's setting in terms of world building, the steeper of gradient there is from fleshed out world building to lore. And if you want to go a little bit not traditional, at least in terms of Western storytelling, you can do something like a bottom-up approach to world building. And I touched on this in previous videos. It's the Miyazaki sort of spiritual, soft world building. And it has to do with the character and their story and their arc and everything. And this is also a completely fine way of building a world. It doesn't really change that much in terms of world building. It's just that rules in soft world building are a little bit more hidden and mysterious than it is in hard world building, like hard sci-fi, like The Expanse, for example, or Seven Eves. So bottom up in terms of world building would be something like there being a piece of technology that exists, and there's a corporation that has to make that technology, and then that means that there's a CEO of that company that makes that technology, and there's workers there, and that company exists on a physical space, so there has to be a continent or something, and it has to be a world that the continent is on. So you can just keep on going up and up, and eventually you get to a world, and you get to a universe, and then you get to weather patterns. And then you spend 30 years making weather patterns for your world, in which the story has nothing to do with weather patterns because the story takes place in space. Okay, here's another example. You have a small hotel on the side of a road, and that road is in a town, and that town is in a city, and that city's in a country, and then that country is in a continent, and it's on a world, and that world was created by a comet crashing into... Okay, let's stop with that. You get what I mean. Okay, another one is this. You can have something like, let's say you have a really cool idea for a bioluminescent plant, and you can really easily base a whole culture or society off that. So if the plant is rare or like a rare naturally occurring one. It's perhaps the luminescent dye that's worth a lot of money and people will be willing to kill over it. There's early emperors and kings that sought after it to dye their clothing, and it became a status symbol. You know, there's been wars waged in its name between empires and for its status. You could also go more of a fantasy route and be like, oh, this plant is magical, and if you consume it, you gain magical powers. And every different color is a different type of magic. And like wizards and mages are people who've eaten a lot of these plants and they've become sort of magical themselves. And so there's a whole magic industry based off of making people into wizards using this plant. And that is to fuel the great emperor's army. Or if you're doing something more sci-fi, you could do something like, this is a scientific breakthrough in terms of botany. You know, this plant can survive really cold and dark winters, and growing this plant will allow light during dark months because guess what? The planet is actually ringed and there's huge regions of time where there's just no light because the ring's covering it up. So no crops grow. And society in this cold season is really hard to live in, so you have to have light. And early people used this plant and its bioluminescent properties to light everything. And so the plant is really revered and there's a religion based off of the plant. Or maybe it's just simply the sign of regrowth after an apocalypse. Maybe this takes place in a world where nobody could care less about a bioluminescent plant because there's just way too much stuff going on, and all this plant really is a symbol of the survivors of this apocalypse that are trying their best to rebuild, and that plant serves as a motivation or inspiration to, you know, you'll always be bright in the dark time. I don't know. You know what I mean. So all of this to say is that researching for world building isn't particularly difficult. It's just you have to find an interesting string or an idea and tug at it. And if you tug at it and follow it, you'll find a whole network of ideas that gush forth, and there's no way to go. You just see whatever's cool to you and then you keep on going and building, and you can do that pretty much forever. So you have to stop at one point and you have to be like, okay, that's a good enough concept, or that's a good enough fleshed out lore piece. So don't try to fall too deep inside of the rabbit hole, or if you do, you might find something really, really cool. If we're talking about stories again, the goal here is to create enough quote-unquote lore, for lack of a better term, in order to make the world not seem empty. And this is probably one of the hardest things to do just in general, not even for stories, just in general, when making a world, is to make it not feel empty. Or not like empty as in there's like nothing there, but empty as in if it's just like, you know, the default, okay, there's life and it evolved from this thing and that's it. There's green grass and animals, and then there's people that popped up somehow, and then the people built, like, you know, it's just a very basic way. So you can add some more interesting things by researching interesting phenomena and then basing it off of that. Because, you know, there's a very high level of changing the laws of reality when you're world building, because if you didn't, then, you know, everything would just kind of end up like how Earth is, and then you would just be in Earth. Or if you're starting from complete scratch, you might actually just be in a really empty world because the world is actually a space station or something and you didn't really flesh out anything, so everyone's just kind of like a paper cutout moving around. Okay, so I'm gonna have to cut off the video here because it actually became kind of long, and there was a lot more about Acinora itself, the world that we're building here, and it almost became like 40 minutes long, so I'm going to cut it short to just this much and release the next part, and that would be part 2, or well, part 3 technically, because there's a part 1. And I'm sorry, this is like the 3rd time I've actually teased Acinora without saying anything about it. Trust me, the next one is going to be a deep dive into how I researched this project, and I mean, it's still ongoing, so there's a lot more to do, and I'll discuss some of that in the video.